Compassion, care, and dedication are the central tenets. We can hopefully find solutions and ideas all across the planet and learn from each other, inspire each other. It is connecting people who wouldn't otherwise be exposed to these worlds. Our responsibility to listen to all life with compassion.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Resilience Track Podcast. I'm your host, Graf Innocent Puri, and today we have a truly inspiring guest with us, and she's a brilliant mind behind this fascinating podcast and the power of documentary on spider monkey and conservation rehabilitation. And I can't wait for all of you to hear her story and also her insight. Her name is Stephanie. Stephanie, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Of course! Hello, I'm so excited to be here. It's so exciting to be kind of finally here talking in this space with you and so many great conservation minds throughout the series. I'm Stephanie. My background is in storytelling, documentary storytelling, and conservation, and I've kind of merged the two through, as you mentioned before, a feature-length documentary about spider monkey rehabilitation in the Bolivian Amazon. Kind of my work focuses on more of the philosophical and historical intersection between wildlife and humans. I love thinking about how we have been closely interconnected and intertwined throughout history, both through folklore, myth, but then also the practical overlapping of us on land and sea and all in between, because I firmly believe that humans and nature are not separate, but humans are just within this idea of nature altogether here on Earth. So I'm super excited to be talking about all these things today. So thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Yeah, you are welcome. You are welcome. You are welcome. So, being the person who has been like doing all these things, you have done a lot of things. You have done your documentary, and also you are the brilliant mind behind this podcast. So I think we'd also like to know what really inspired you to found this podcast, and also what has been the most rewarding part of that journey.
Yeah, so the Resilience Tracks podcast kind of is the accumulation of just a desire to connect with the incredible alumni community of the Nat Geo and TNC externship program. I was part of the founding class when I was a freshman entering college, which was a crazy life change for me, and so many of us were kind of all in different parts of our early career and educational journeys for upper education. So I kind of see this podcast as the opportunity to connect all these minds in another space, and not only connect through these conversations, but also serve as documentation of where we are. Because I firmly believe that this group of alumni is some of the next generation of conservation leaders and sustainability leaders across the world. Like, we have people from literally every corner of the planet taking this program, so we can learn so much from each other. A big kind of problem in conservation is the segmentation of knowledge and isolation of these ideas that are restricted based on locality, culture. But through this, we can hopefully find solutions and ideas all across the planet and learn from each other, inspire each other, and hopefully serve as a place that we can all grow together to make this world a wonderful place.
Great. That is so inspiring. So now if we just talk about like in deep, right now, if we talk about the documentary, because I was like going through your website, I've seen some exciting things that you tend to do. Like you try to tell a story using photography, taking pictures. Like what do you really want to achieve behind that? Okay, what is really remain the message that you want to deliver?
I think for starters, conservation at its core is a scientific profession in many ways, and can often feel like it is restricted to certain communities, whether it's high academia and universities or people working in the industry. And it's a very difficult competitive industry to exist within, so it can be very inaccessible and understandable, especially when we're thinking about conserving more than human life, so animals, plants, fungi. That is a big step for a lot of people. It's a big step for a lot of people to kind of expand their moral circle, to want to be caring about spaces that don't immediately obviously have a clear impact into a human life. So my kind of goal with photography and videography is to be the translator of scientific knowledge, but then also the translator of bridging the worlds of these beings that experience the world in a very different way than humans, and trying to make the path, the bridge between humans and nature, humans and animals, humans and non-human life, much more seamless and ultimately bring more compassion. And I think that also kind of stems from my background. So basically, I grew up in the United States, and then for university, I went to a school called Minerva University, which is the most incredible, crazy program I've ever done, where each semester, the cohort, which is about 160 of us, lives and studies in a different international city every semester, and the cohort is built up of 80% international students. So through that, it was a big shift of really touching and reaching so many different people, communities that I've never been exposed to before, and then also living in those spaces and understanding the subtleties of how culture, how place, all shifts how we think about our position in the world and our position as related to others. So I have found that with photography, videography, or writing, or any of these communicative bridges, it is connecting people who wouldn't otherwise be exposed to these worlds. And I've had a lot of conversations where it does inspire people to care a bit more. Maybe they're not gonna pursue conservation with the intensity that we will, but they'll have a bit more understanding, empathy, and hopefully send some money to the protection as well.
Exactly. Yeah, that is so inspiring. And like as it is these days, like telling stories, people need to see what is really actually going on. Now, if we look at the podcast, what gap did you like see in conservation in terms of storytelling, and inspired you in terms of just looking at um, the podcast itself?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think for starters, when I was interacting with conservation spaces and trying to figure out how to enter these worlds, it was very elusive and very confusing. To start with, we all have our National Geographic magazine. I have so many of them, and I found them at like thrift stores and wherever I could grab a National Geographic magazine and look through all the photos, and I just dreamed of kind of being in this space. The problem I found with it is that when we're trying to enter spaces, you see the people who are well into their career, like 10, 20 years, and it's very unclear how they got there and how do we get there in a modern world. The landscape was very different to enter these spaces before, so the advice of kind of weaving your way in is very different and very circumstantial. So my hope was through this podcast to find the people who are equally inspired that are my age and our ages, and then to kind of build that horizontal network that we can all lift each other up, and then we can all know about each other, so that if there's a project, if there's an idea, we know who we can reach out to, we know who we can kind of find our friendships and our allies and all join the space together, as opposed to having to network only with people who have a breadth of experience, like finding more that kind of intersection. And in terms of storytelling and inspiring, I hope that through this podcast it's more of a exploratory place. So each episode we're going to be talking to someone who approaches conservation through AI or computer science, another person who's like you, working in the field with elephants, very much on the ground in the space, perceiving an elephant right in front of you. And then there will be people who are huge NGOs, starting these things from the ground up. There's so many different ways to enter the space, And I also hope that through that we can see all the different ways that people contribute and help into things that we care about, as opposed to just like the single narratives that tend to be the mainstream, I guess, identity of a conservationist or someone who works in sustainability.
Now we'll jump in, like mainly looking at the documentary that you did, which is the spider monkey documentary. Why exactly? Like, why did you just choose monkey spiders especially for your documentary, other than maybe choosing an elephant? You know, I love elephants, huh? Why didn't you not choose an elephant?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think in terms of choosing the species subject of the film, that was definitely subjected to my personal bias and love for primates. My story into primate love is a very strange one, I must say. First, I really liked the orangutan emoji on my phone. I'm like, this is a funny thing. I'm just gonna start using this emoji out of context, no reason, and it slowly became a thing. I'd use it in front of professors, I'd use it with my friends, to the point where I became known of using this strange emoji. And through this use of the emoji, I kind of was like, oh, maybe orangutans in real life are really cool. Yeah, I'm going to start reading everything I can about orangutans, and that kind of grew and grew. And then when I was studying in Taiwan in my second year of university, I was on a trip to the southern part of the island, and I knew there were a wild monkey population. So all I did was like hike around the woods trying to find these monkeys, and I remember I was like, well, they're not apes, they're not orangutans, they're not as cool, but I'm sure it'll be fun to see monkeys in the wild, because I've never seen that being from North America. And then when I first saw them, I just started crying. It was the strangest, craziest tears of joy. I've never experienced anything like it. And from that point forward, I very much was kind of obsessed, I must say. I read every primatology textbook I could get my hands on. I was just looking up anything I could. And when I was going to Argentina for my studies, actually, I was looking for some type of volunteer work that I could, actually be in the field, be the Jane Goodall, be the Bairuta Higaldicas, be Diane Fossey, any of these stellar, star primatology conservationists. And I found a place that accepted people to work in the rehabilitation space. And I stayed there, and it's in Bolivia, for 1 month, and then I had to go to do my studies, and my heart was ripped out of my chest because I didn't want to leave at all. And then all I was thinking about for the next year is how can I get back here? How can I get back to this space? How can I help this place that I think has a really pure mission of trying to save spider monkeys from the illegal pet trade and return them to the wild, which is very hard to do and a very rare thing to do in South America. So then for the next year I was planning, I had to do my capstone or dissertation for my undergraduate degree. So I'm like, and at my university we're liberal arts, so we have a bit more flexibility in terms of what we do, because I studied history and ecology, so arts and humanities, and then also sciences. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna merge the two. I'm gonna force this down my advisors' throats. I am gonna do a documentary because I've loved film, and I'm gonna use this as my way to get back to the center, and I'll film this place. So that was kind of my long-winded way of getting there. And yeah, when I found spider monkeys, I'm like, these guys are the coolest. In terms of the actual kind of practicality, intentional decision-making, besides my personal bias, the kind of underlying question I went in with the film is, how should humans and non-human animals connect? I think that's a kind of a crux in the conservation field right now, especially with one kind of sector of conservation being very wilderness oriented. Humans are separate from nature. We should leave these places pristine, untouched, very few minimal contact. And then there's the other side, which is no, humans are constantly at the interface of nature. We're deeply entwined and a part of it, and contact and connection is a very big thing. If people don't care about animals, if people don't care about nature, they're not going to protect it. And I think the Spider Monkey Rehabilitation Center is a really unique spot for this, because it's saving monkeys from the illegal pet trade. So the pet trade is where humans are at the most having severe, like high levels of contact with monkeys, physical contact, which we often think of contact equals connection. But that's not always the case. Like the strongest, most purest, good connections might be ones of a distance, or there might be ones of proximity. So then at the rehabilitation center, you're kind of at this in-between section where some contact is necessary to raise very young spider monkeys without a mother anymore, but then with the ultimate goal of having no contact to then release them. So the film overall explores, like, how does connection exist in the realm of conservation? How does contact and connection intertwine? How do they support each other? How do they also hinder each other and help make more a successful life for the autonomy and freedom of more than human life?
Great. That is so insightful. Like, to be honest, talking about whether people or humans are part of the ecosystem is something that is a very deep and big debate in conservation, because some of the people prefer people not to live near places where animals or wild animals tend to live, and it happens here in Africa where people are being moved out of the park and they have been there coexisting with the animals. So that is so insightful. I want to understand on the part of spider monkey, what is the role do the spider monkey play in the ecosystem, and why is the conservation of these species very important?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So to begin with, spider monkeys, I think in some ways you could call them a keystone species for the Amazon region. So in terms of seed dispersal, when monkeys, they move through the forest, they're swinging all through the trees and jungles and eating fruit all over the place. And when you eat the fruit, you poop something out, which are the seeds, and those seeds help to spread plants all across the jungle. So what's really interesting is I was there when my friend was doing some research at the center. So the center takes place on secondary forest. The land used to be a farm, but is actually now regrowth right at the edge of primary forest, primary Amazon, like the big rich jungle is right surrounding it.
Yeah.
So she was studying, and there's no spider monkeys in this area. They've been long gone, except for the rehabilitation ones. So what she was studying is how do the rehabilitating monkeys, which are semi-wild at this point, do they contribute to the regrowth of the forest? And what she was finding is a lot of positive evidence to support that these rehabilitating monkeys, ones that aren't even fully wild, they're semi-wild, so they have the free autonomy to move about, but there's still a little humanization that exists within them, that these monkeys that were coming from the pet trade, lost their mother, would never have another chance at the wild, are contributing and giving back to this huge ecosystem by allowing this the secondary forest that was once cut down to regrow to the primary biodiverse richness, spreading all the different species of plants all everywhere. And I think that is just testament of the power of conservation, that you just see something that these spider monkeys would have no other life, no other future if the people at the center did not stand in every single day to try to get them back to a free swing through the jungle kind of way. And to address the second half of the question, which was, why is it important to conserve spider monkeys? I think that comes down to a conservation strategy opinion. So there's methods that are thinking about species level. So on the species level, spider monkeys are endangered in a lot of parts of South America, the different species, specifically the Peruvian ones, which are in Bolivia and Peru, that we work with. The big threats tend to be, according to the IUCN, it is hunting and illegal logging. But I would say hunting is the one they say is the primary target, but I would strongly suggest that deforestation is perhaps not the obvious first mechanism that is leading to the decline in population, but with deforestation it makes it much easier to find and hunt spider monkeys, and therefore overhunt and reduce the population sizes. So that is a big problem. And so the second part is, do we do conservation on a species level, or do we do conservation on an ecosystem level, so a protected area, for example?
Yeah.
And this center is more species level focused because it is like a cascading effect, that the hope of reintroducing and bringing spider monkeys to this region that otherwise wouldn't have this chance, like their chance at the wild was stolen by being in the pet trade.
Mm-hmm.
They are helping with the cascading effects of seed dispersal to also help the plants grow, the forest regenerate, and support the ecosystem returning to that high growth state.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very sad that we find that most of the animals that are taken for pet trade, and they get to lose their natural being, like natural or wild being, per se. Most of the time, we find that if the animal, especially the monkeys, they tend to be domesticated, and if you take them to the wild, it will be like a free meal for the wild animal. Like those are predators, which is a very bad thing. Which means even introducing them back into the wild as well, it is just more like we are not doing anything. I think the center is doing a very good job. It is different from the elephants, though. You find that the elephants, they will tend, just if they are being affected with human elephant conflict, if they as they grow, because they are like big animals, if they go back into the world, it will be, they can protect themselves. Yeah. So can you like maybe just give us a scene or share a scene, like when you are in the field, how it is done, all those kind of things.
Yeah, of course. So I think this kind of ties back into our earlier discussion of communication methods. So my goal with this film was to, I really like indie film, I like indie documentaries that go through different film festivals and explore different cultures and such like that. So my goal with this film was to definitely explore how can the medium of film really push and make wildlife conservation and telling the stories of non-human life more accessible, because I find that the kind of mainstream techniques, which would be called like the nature films, natural history films, called like blue chip films that you kind of think of when you hear David Attenborough's very wonderful voiceovers and you see these pristine shots, super high budget productions. I kind of want to explore the gap of what can we do when we have the limitations of no budget, using very limited equipment, and then leaning into those limitations as a style guide. So there's one type of filmmaking style that I was really drawn to called cinema verte, which is basically, I don't think I pronounced that right, but it's basically kind of emphasizing the handheld nature of a camera and embracing the shakiness of it, embracing the quick movements, the documentation aspect, as opposed to the curated story aspect that happens in the really high grade wildlife film. So I wanted to kind of fuse the two worlds of, we allow documenting, vlogging, well, mine's not a vlog, but the kind of on the whim nature of documentary for a human world, but can we bring that to non-human life and therefore kind of make non-human life storytelling more accessible just by virtue of different tastes, different flavors of style and genre. So that's the first step. And so basically, for the filming process, I went to the rescue center back again for 3 months over the summer during dry season, and it was just me as the filmmaker. I'm very grateful to even have access to this space. It was a very collaborative process between me and the team members of the center and the staff. I'm so gracious that they let me even come and to spend time there. I was mixing my time between volunteering to give back to the center, so through the rehabilitation work, and then also the other half would be following the staff around and filming that. What I brought with me was one camera, I guess, a GoPro as well, but one mirrorless camera, 2 lenses, a microphone, and a tripod, and that was it. So it's a very low budget production, and just me, so it was very difficult to, get all the different angles, move through it. But I think the biggest challenges came in when thinking about how to ethically film wildlife. Filming wildlife has a very problematic and contentious history. Some people describe it as filming wildlife is replacing guns with cameras.
Yeah.
Thinking of the similar words that we use, we shoot
Yeah.
a film and we shoot with a gun, which is very good in some ways because we're not shooting animals anymore. But at the same time, it is a history of a lot of exploitative practices, such as baiting animals with meat to come close, encouraging or telling stories of high action, like the lions. The guys are sleeping most of the time, but every film about a lion is a really intense catch of prey and stuff. So my goal with this film was to kind of try to tell a more ethical story, both me on the ground as the filmmaker and then me in the edit trying to tell a representative story of the actual kind of timeline and goings of spider monkeys. So on the field, this meant always maintaining at least 6 feet distance from the monkeys. Sometimes this is difficult because they are free and able to do what they want, and they are curious and love to get close, but that was a constant awareness. So if my head was behind the camera, I was always having like one eye through the viewfinder and one eye looking some other direction, just always perpetually aware of what's going on around me, every single movement of the 20 plus monkeys that would be in the area at a time. And this also meant that I had to really work within the constraints of the gear. My rule was I do not want to be a distraction to the rehabilitation process by any means. So if I can read spider monkeys pretty well because I am trained to do the volunteer and rehabilitation work. So I know the different subtle facial expressions, the eye contact. I avoided all eye contact if possible because that is an indication of attention to them. And if a monkey was in any way curious about an object, I'd move away as fast as possible to not encourage it. And there were a few situations where contact did happen, like I was jumped by a monkey because they were very curious about the microphone. And in those cases, I realized, okay, like a tripod got them super excited. They're like, this big thing, crazy, I want to check it out. From that point forward, no more tripod around certain monkeys. Like I knew them by name, so I'd be like, okay, Mateo is obsessed with the tripod. I will not be near him with a tripod. Which also was crazy because at that, it sacrifices a little bit of the visual quality. I have a lot more unstable shots, a lot more difficulty to get the shots, but at the bottom line, the safety of the animals and the success of their rehabilitation will always come first when I'm making a film. Always. Always. Like, some people will have different opinions on this. I'm a firm believer that the benefits of a film are nonlinear. The financial payoff is unobvious. The emotional persuasion is unobvious. It has a big impact for some, but we can never measure that. But I can measure the success, like my intervention in the space. If I'm like one day of them being crazy about a tripod could mean 5 days setback in terms of them being dehumanized and ready to be released fully into the wild. And I will not have that. So that was kind of the first step on the field. And in the edit, that also meant that I didn't use any Foley or like sound effects that were happening after the fact. So sometimes in films, you'll hear like the footprint of a bear walking by a camera. That's not the real footprint of the bear. It is used to kind of immerse you into that world, but for me it was really important to use only the sounds of the jungle as they were occurring, where they were occurring, and the visuals as well. So if a monkey is screaming, it's very much contextualized with the film itself. If a monkey is giving a call and there's a response, it's the response of the monkey from a different shot will be because of the initial call in the primary shot. And all the sounds would be the same. So the sounds you hear in the jungle is that Amazon. It's not some birds in a different country. It is the birds happening right there on that land within that few kilometers of space. So that was really important to me as well.
Great. That's just so exciting. I think one day I need to find myself where you are doing your filming, and I think it is so exciting seeing you filming, and also seeing filming most of the time. To be honest, I've seen people doing some filming. Sustainability is in there. People just want to film, and so long as they have a good film, it just sometimes like there are parks where they don't allow vehicles to go off-road, and you find people trying to go off-road. Now, you having the mindset of just looking at the sustainability and also trying not to disturb the actual behavior and also the growth of them being introduced again into the world. That's a very great move. I think I truly appreciate that as a young conservationist. Then, if we look at now, what are the challenges do the rehabilitation centers face?
So, with this rehabilitation center, and many, to be honest, it is a constant battle to get enough funding. So,
Mhm.
animals need to be fed, supplies need to be made, like whether that's a cage or some kind of rope or lead that helps kind of the intermediate processes of release. Those
Mhm.
things cost a lot of money, and money is in short supply. Secondly, a lot of centers that I'm aware of, it's very difficult to have the money to support stable and strong staff. So a lot of places tend to be reliant on volunteers, which has a layer of complexities from not being able to have stable, consistent people, because if you're volunteering, there's no expectation that you have to stay for a long time. Or two,
Yeah.
volunteers are paying astronomical amounts of money, which is a huge disadvantage to people who want to work in this field but have to pay to be an intern, who have to come from a very privileged place to even afford the opportunity to enter these spaces. That's a huge problem. And then
Yeah.
three, just never knowing where the finances are going to come for the next month of taking care. So you end up being reliant on volunteers to come through, to bring the money, to then be able to keep the park open and sustainable. That is a very difficult task, and I think ends up being a reinforcing negative loop of you're just always barely meeting ends meet,
Yeah.
unless, for example, there's other centers that perhaps exploit this a bit more. So yeah, like I said, charging volunteers a lot to come, or allowing visitors through various tourism. There's like, at every step you kind of have the conflict of when do you compromise the success of the animals for the sake of getting enough funds to keep the animals in the process. So it's very difficult to find the right balance of that, and I don't know if anyone's found that right balance. The second part would be with any rehabilitation of an animal, especially one as sophisticated as a monkey and a spider monkey, which are very intelligent creatures,
Mhm.
there's a lot of unlearning that has to be done from the monkey who was in very close contact with humans and in human care for various amounts of their life, whether that's the contact of wanting to be close to a human or the abuse that comes from being near humans that they had in their previous pet journeys. And then the second part would be like, it's not a perfect science rehabilitation. Like with monkeys, every monkey is very different, comes from a very different background, and also just naturally has a very unique personality. Just like you and me, we're both humans, but we have very different interests. The same thing happens for monkeys. So finding a conservation or like a rehabilitation plan that works for each one is going to look very different and be very difficult. And there is no kind of guidebook or procedure of reintroduction plans, rehabilitation plans that is tested, tried, and proven specifically for spider monkeys. It's just an underreported field, and it's only the beginning steps of a lot of rehabilitation. Like I believe in South America for big cats like cats like ocelots, jaguars, and stuff, there really hasn't been any full releases. There's a few places that have done it, but it's very new science, and some countries have never done it. So there's so many regulations that come with it as well. Like, how do you release a monkey that was a pet, is interested in humans, back into a jungle where there are many communities of humans? How do you balance the right amount of provision, so giving them food, but also making them learn and lead into the jungle by themselves? To what degree do you vaccinate them for human spread diseases, but then they're supposed to be wild? So there's so many like conflicting points at every single step, and I think that's something I didn't know when I was first going to conservation, is that there's so much like social sciences, as everyone says. Like conservation is not, it's really a field about navigating the people as much as it is navigating animals. You have to be very attuned to both, to negotiate with people, to make sure that communities are involved in rehabilitation processes, because like you can't just release a monkey right next to a community, and
Yeah.
you have to make sure that they're okay with it, if they are part of that journey of understanding why it's important to mitigate hunting or whatever steps along the way. So there's really challenges every single day, and I think on a personal level, huge challenges are also the deaths that come along with it, because with every success, there's going to be tenfold of hardships beneath it. monkeys that are reintroduced and potentially aren't fit for the group and get attacked, or monkeys that come in when they're ill and have yellow fever or something, and you witness a personality that you cared for every single day for months sadly pass away and there's nothing you can do. And that's heartbreaking. For sure.
Yeah, that it is. And thank you for the great, like, that is a very good insight. So, if we can go now to, if we look at now the broader conservation work that you have done, like, what have you learned about resilience and in both ecosystem and also people through your work?
In terms of resilience, I've learned that compassion, care, and dedication are the central tenets to the work. It's kind of obsessive at times, and people sacrifice their whole entire well-beings to make this work. Like, living in the Amazon, for example, is not an easy place. There are so much life there that can be very harmful, such as mosquitoes with malaria or dengue, or for me, I had a fly larva buried in my ankle for a while. Just so many, like, infections. And the jungle's a very intense place, beautiful, but tough on the body. And it was incredible to see the people who spend years upon years in this space. You see them eating very, like, scraps of food because their attention is on the monkeys. Everything they have, their whole world is protecting these animals and giving them a second chance, oftentimes above themselves. And I'm not saying that has to be the answer everywhere, but just seeing the persistence and commitment that everyone has, that was truly inspiring and enlightening. I think the second part of it also is the consistent learning of how do we engage communities constantly, every single step of the process in conservation, because as you mentioned before, with like displacement of people from areas that become protected for conservation purposes, we need to find solutions that remember the people that exist in these places, and no successful conservation solution will happen without the cooperation, understanding, and input of the people that are impacted in that area. Just full stop. So that is definitely a learning, is that every single way, the key is to listen. Yeah, I think maybe that's the key thing, to listen. You have to listen and be attuned to the animals and the life around you and what they're trying to say and be on their own terms, and not from a human bias lens. And then also the people who aren't, like, you know, as dedicated to this field. Like, we're passionate, we know that. Yeah. And not everyone's going to be passionate, and that's okay. And that's not their responsibility to be obsessed and, you know, lay their life on the line for these beings. But what is our responsibility is to bridge the gap and create mutual understanding, respect, and care for everyone that is impacted by conservation work. So to listen to all life with compassion.
So now we're going to our favorite moment, like favorite part, which is the hot take. So this part mainly will ask you about to share your strong opinion or a perspective on the conservation that not everybody can agree on. It will be something again that maybe might shake up the audience and our listeners, that can also bring debate.
Let me have a moment to refine my takes. There's so many, and I just need to make sure that I pick the right one. Not to ruffle too many feathers as well.
I know you have a lot of. Just pick that hot one, you know, the hot one that will shake up the room.
Okay. I think my hot take is we really should strongly reconsider and try to adjust the frameworks for who is doing the conserving of spaces and why. What this means is conservation has a very, very, sometimes somewhat sour reliance, history and reliance on white saviorism as a mechanism to conserve spaces. It's kind of by the law and logic of Western places, Europeans and the US alike, of what animals get protecting, what spaces should be protected, which often I think is projecting Eurocentric and Western beliefs onto places that do not have those same values and understanding. So the biggest case, like for example, national parks, as we mentioned, displacing indigenous and local populations for the sake of protecting this land and separating humans from nature. That is a very American ideal that is not useful to local communities. And I also think in terms of value judgments. So in the case of spider monkeys in Bolivia, I mentioned before that hunting is a major cause of the risk of extinction. But we also must remember that hunting spider monkeys and the pets of spider monkeys has a very complex history with indigenous practices for hundreds of thousands of years, very underdocumented in English literature. So first, that needs to be more research, but secondly, we must understand the values that people have and what are the kind of normative assumptions. So for me, what is the difference between shooting a cow and a spider monkey besides the endangerment? Like, they're both animals. They both, I think, have some capacity and right to live. So perhaps we shouldn't be thinking about people who hunt spider monkeys are the villains, but we should be thinking about what other systems are making it more difficult. So as I mentioned before, deforestation, that is reducing the habitat size of spider monkeys so that they're easier to find, easier to hunt, as opposed to villainizing people who do hunt them for sustenance. If you're hunting for the pet trade, that's a bit different. That is more like economically driven and less like need. But if it's a sustenance hunting that is part of a cultural practice for hundreds of years, I think those views should be respected, understood, and incorporated in conservation management plans rather than lump sum assumptions from European and Western ideologies to place onto lands that aren't their own.
Yeah, that is a very hot, hot take there. So now we take it to our listeners. What do you think about this hot take? And we would love to hear your comments and also just to hear your thoughts about her hot take and what you think might be done or what you agree and what you don't agree. She's here to burn the room.
Yeah,
so
please share.
Yeah. So now if we go now to just almost like final touches of our podcast, I have like two last more questions that are very, very important. One of the questions that I have is like, what would you give as an advice to a young conservationist out there who wants to use media and also laser awareness?
Yes, great thing. A piece of advice. I think a big piece of advice is remembering that conservation and care for wildlife and non-human life exists everywhere. It is not just the starlight fauna that we look at, so the polar bears, tigers, jaguars, the big cool things that we see in, movies and television that are worth caring about, being curious about, and saving. It can be as simple as the squirrels in your backyard, being curious about the frogs that are growing in a pond nearby, and realizing that you don't need to go far away to make an impact and to be meaningful. Every space is necessary, whether that's a community garden in your urban environment or, just look around you and see because you know your land best and where you are from. You have a huge knowledge advantage there. So really embracing that and recognizing that wherever you are, whether you're in the suburbs, a city, or if you're in a more rural environment, you do have a role and an impact there. And I think that's really important. For media, I don't know if this is, it's not so much advice, but it is a very big wish that I would love more people to express their interests and the stories of non-human life in different mediums and styles. So exploring the medium of film and exploring the world of wildlife, I think, is very important. So the conventions do exist, but let's break the conventions and through that we can make wildlife conservation and sustainability more accessible to more people.
Great, great. That is a very good advice and good insight. Everybody these days got have their phone. You can just grab your phone and say, "Oh, look at this plant," and it is good. And everybody's at the end of the day, somebody will read something. Oh, these plants are
Exactly.
this particular head. That is a very good advice. Now, if you look at yourself now, where do you see yourself in terms of taking these projects in the next few years?
Yeah, the big scary question. So I just graduated university, so a lot of things are up in the air and I'm figuring that out. But my big goals for the next few years is to continue on the storytelling path and seeing how different modes of visual media can support my kind of big question that I mentioned at the beginning of the cultural intersection of human and non-human life. I want to look at the historical accounts of mutualistic interactions, so not just human-animal conflict, but also human-wildlife support and connection. So my goal is to explore that through visual series, short documentaries, or a few bigger documentaries or docuseries all across the world in different cultures and communities. Would be awesome.
Yeah. They usually say like these days the saying changed. Back in the days they were like, "Oh, the sky is the limit." Now the sky is no longer the limit. You can do it, and you still do it. So if I can just give you an opportunity to just share on where people can find you and how they can reach out, or where they can just learn about your work.
Yes, of course. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. Second of all, if you're listening and you are curious about anything, you want to debate my hot take, you want to talk about film and wildlife or any type of conservation that you heard or piqued your interest, please reach out. This podcast is a place to spark conversations and start new connections, and I am very excited to talk and meet more of you guys. So if you want to find out more about me, you can visit my website, stephaniefroebel.com, or I'm on Instagram at Steph Froebel or at Wild Steph Froebel. That's a wildlife account, crazy. And LinkedIn, also Stephanie Froebel. The title should spell my name in somewhere. Somewhere should say my full name so you can spell it right, but
Yeah.
those are the places. Stephanie Froebel or Steph Froebel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening. See you next time. And thank you for being part of this podcast, Stephanie.